climate change. My name's Emma, and I work on the Girls Education Challenge FM side of things around the learning. And we're particularly interested in what's coming out from projects. So maybe I've met quite a few of you. I'm afraid I can't see everybody on the call at the moment. So welcome today. I'm really excited about today because this is an area of programming which I think lots of us find challenging in various ways. And I'd like to start off by asking everybody to complete a little kind of Padlet. Sharina, I don't know if you have the link, you could pop it in the chat. We're going to be recording this session, I think Sharina just said in the chat, because we'd like to record especially the start of it for people who couldn't come. But we'd like to start to find out where you're all from. So in the chat in a moment, you will find a link to Padlet, and it'd be great if you could open that up. I'm not sure if you saw a video that was sent around on how to use it. It's quite simple. So if you haven't used it before, don't worry. If you can open it, in the top right-hand corner, you'll find sort of three little buttons. If you click on those, you can add your location, your name, your role, your project, and we can find out where you are. It would be really interesting for us to understand a bit more about the spread, who's joining us, as we would like to carry these conversations further. So while we're doing that, it would be great to sort of talk about the purpose of today. And today is about sharing and building evidence and work we are doing around climate change mitigation of impacts, awareness, and developing resilience. The point of it really is to share and learn from each other. And the reason why we wanted to do this today is that back in November, when it was COP26, myself and a few colleagues on the FM, but also with FCDO, put together a panel that went to COP26 where Sharon Tao, our director, education director, met with quite a few other people there. And they discussed the link between climate change and girls' education. And I think also, if you haven't seen it, Sharina will also put in the chat some links to that event that we had, a little film that we made with the support of VSO Engage, who are also here today. It was really quite an important moment in time, I felt, when we talked about COP26, not least for the sort of the external discussion around it, but also internally. You know, what do we know about climate change and girls' education? And often I think it's seen as a bit of a challenge. And discussion is sort of peppered with arguments that sometimes lay the fault or the work at the door of girls in the countries where we work and the communities that we work with. And I think that is not only unfair, but also it sort of detracts away from what we think we can do and what's possible. We're all aware about the climate change impacts. We acutely see them in the communities where we work. We're all concerned and interested in what programming a girls' education can achieve and to mitigate those impacts of climate change, raise awareness, and also support resilience. So today, it's great to have VSO and everybody here in the room where we can start a discussion around sharing what we do in this arena. And thank you very much for filling out the MS form, where we ask people questions around what they already do with climate change interventions. We know that projects on the GEC have witnessed firsthand the impacts of climate change, from flooding and unseasonal rain in Nepal, to Somalia, food insecurity in Malawi, extreme weather in Zimbabwe and Zambia. We've seen that projects adapt their programming all the time, and they work with education clusters, humanitarian systems, etc. You know, there's a risk-based approach, and we see that projects work really, really hard to kind of work on the barriers that girls are facing and continually analyse and reflect on their implementation. And I personally see all projects on the GEC listening really carefully to communities and girls that they work with. And we know that girls' education is really critical in addressing some climate change challenges. We could go on about sort of the studies that show the link around sort of learning and every year of girls' education and what that means. But I think we have this sort of holistic approach. And when I say we, I mean everybody in this room, but on the GEC. We know that by doing this, we can get girls to attend school and informal education and experience that quality education around their learning, their well-being, and transitioning into work. This is our bread and butter. This is what we all do. But I think sometimes we struggle to articulate this in a climate change impact mitigation and resilience sense. And I think sometimes conversations I've had with people are about, well, how do we best do this? What is an effective way of actually bringing climate change mitigation into programming, and some of us do it more than others. So this is an opportunity to actually share and learn from each other. When we sent around that MS form, I think Shrina just popped it in the chat. There are some questions on there that we're interested in, and what I would like to do is pull those together, and at the end of this workshop, write this up and then send it round. It seems to me that some of the answers we got in that MS form so far, and thank you very much for those, confirm what I've been thinking around. Sometimes we're a bit unsure of the most effective things we can do and what approaches we can take. We're all operating in this space, wanting to maximise the impact of our programming to support the challenges that communities where we work are facing. And we do find it challenging. So today I'm really pleased to welcome VSO to support our conversations on how to best effectively integrate climate change approaches in our programming. And I'm really excited to hear the conversations in the breakout rooms that we're going to have and where we can all share. I think sometimes we just have to link together to work out what best to do and how to move forward. So I'm going to hand over to VSO in a second, where they're going to talk to us around how they have approached climate change and what that means for them and how that plays out in their programming. As you're all aware, or maybe not on the call, VSO have a program in Nepal with the Girls Education Challenge Fund, Engage, who played a really big role in the COP26 event that I talked about earlier. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that event and look at the chat there and the film, please do. It was really, really interesting. So without further ado, welcome everybody. Please do put your comments in the chat, put your hand up. This is not supposed to be a lecture style webinar. I really would like it if people engaged and actually participated fully in what we're doing. So Clodagh, welcome. And if you're ready, shall I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Emma. And what a great introduction and a good way to kick off our session. And as Emma was sharing, you know, climate change is something that we're all grappling with, and we're all trying to find our way to best contribute to solutions. So we just wanted to share the journey that we've taken in the last couple of years and how we're trying to navigate that space. So I'm Clodagh Byrne. I'm the lead advisor for resilience within VSO, and I work very closely alongside my colleague Perna, who is a global lead for education. So maybe I'll just introduce Perna. Would you like to say hello? I know you're in Nepal at the moment.
Hi everybody. If you're wondering why we have the red colors, and today is Holi, happy Holi, and also my birthday. So I'm in my motherland and joining from Nepal. Of course, as Clodagh mentioned, I've just come back from the field visiting, the work of Girls Education and Inclusive Network, which I will share with you what I've seen in terms of climate change work, and they are doing as well. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Perna. And I know the Engage team and many of the Engage team who've been with you, Perna, are also on the call. So really looking forward to hearing some of those reflections. And also thank you to all of you who've been sharing some of the impacts you're seeing of climate change within your work. So I think we'll just start maybe the session looking at, what we see and what we're hearing from you, the impacts we're seeing of climate change on girls' education. And we do all know that climate change is having a disproportionate impact on children, but also within children who are extremely vulnerable. Girls have very specific vulnerabilities. I'm just going to check, can everyone see the slides, the presentation slides? I'm not sure I can see them yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, it's not just me being a bit blind. That's good. Thank you. So yeah, let's. Yeah, so this is really just introducing our approach as VSO, and we're looking forward to working with you because I think together we can find ways to address climate change, and how we're seeing it as we're trying to find climate pathways within our work, so ways to build climate resilience within the different approaches that we use. So our session today is called Pathways to Climate Resilience within Girls' Education. And yes, we'll definitely share the slides after the event, and we'll also share some documentation of our discussions. So as I was saying, climate change has a disproportionate impact on children, And within that, girls are most vulnerable in many contexts. And you've been sharing through your responses to the survey that Shreen and Emma sent out what some of those impacts are. But maybe let's look at a few. There's so many. There's a multitude of impacts of climate change on girls, but let's explore some of them. So first of all, climate change, we're seeing disrupts access to education. So basically, climate change is a changing weather patterns that we're seeing globally due to human-induced activities, particularly emissions of fossil fuel and greenhouse gases. And this is causing a change in weather patterns, which is resulting in more frequent and intense flooding, drought, heat waves, but it's very specific to the context. But what we're seeing as VSO, and we're working in multiple countries, that we're seeing overall increasing disruption of schools. This might be to flooding in some contexts. It might be due to cyclones in others. So we've just had cyclones in both Mozambique and Philippines, which has led to many schools being damaged and children not being able to attend. So climate change impacts can actually block children's access to school. But then even when children can attend school, and we're seeing that education facilities themselves can become very uncomfortable and sometimes quite dangerous for children. So for example, climate change can make buildings unsafe if there's been cyclones, for example. They can also, climate change such as drought can reduce access to water and sanitation within schools. And we hear many examples of children who are affected by heat and heat waves. So excessive heat makes it very difficult for children to focus on their lessons. And then at the community level, we see climate change is also causing impacts, which is in turn impacting children's education, and particularly girls' education as well. So for example, livelihood disruption, families whose livelihoods are disrupted sometimes can't afford fees to send children to school, or maybe have less food security or food access, which is often resulting in malnutrition of children, with younger children particularly impacted. And these, even a temporary incident of malnutrition in young children can lead to very long-term cognitive and development issues. Again, with livelihoods and the increased stress of climate change, for girls particularly, we're seeing higher levels of gender-based violence and often early pregnancy and child marriages, which again can mean that girl children are taken out or withdraw from school. And then all the different multitude of health impacts which are associated with climate change. So we're seeing as global weather changes, increases in malaria, increases in dengue, and all of these diseases, even cholera, for example, during flooding, have a much higher mortality rates and much higher impacts on children. And then the actual climate disasters themselves, to bear in mind that children have an 80% more likely chance of having an impact, a mortality or serious impact from those climate disasters, and also experience a lot of trauma after them. So you can see the context is very, the wide range of impacts that children have to navigate, and how in so many ways this is impacting on education access. And many of you shared some of these impacts you're seeing on the ground within your own work. So what can we do about it? So if we move to the next slide, so we're seeing, and it's important to say that this context is going to get worse. The science is saying that climate change is going to intensify, and we know that this is going to get worse. But there are things that we can do to address it. So within this, I see a hand there. Rabindra, I wonder if you'd like to say something?
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to share something just before the presentation of Sam sir. who is our consortium project manager from BSO Nepal. The query you just have raised about the issues of the education is, but what BSO Nepal has been doing is, BSO Nepal has already established the complaint response mechanism in the schools, so that every girls and every boys, if they feel any issues, they can have opportunity to report from the complaint box, and that is the mechanism. They will definitely have an opportunity to respond on that. So if you have any queries in this regard, we will definitely discuss about, and I'm sure Sam sir, the consortium project manager from BSO, will definitely cover all the things in his presentation later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabindra, and we're looking forward to hearing from the Engage team as we look at some of those pathways we're using within our work. And we really want to hear from all GF partners some of the approaches that you feel have been really effective at addressing and identifying some of these risks, because as I'm going to share with you, to actually address those risks, it really involves three main stages. First of all, we need to be aware of them. What are the climate risks? And we can see from what you're sharing as partners that you're already aware, you're seeing risks within school, and you're seeing some of the impacts on children. So in order to build climate resilience, we really need to build capacity of children, of teachers, of system stakeholders to first understand climate and understand the risks that are happening now, but also how those risks are going to get worse. So, for children, it's very important not to introduce too much information in terms of, the worsening impacts of climate change. We'll discuss some of that after, but it's very important for them to be aware of climate change and to be able to share the risks that they're facing. And so to be able to also anticipate, what kind of risks are going to happen in their schools or in their communities. And then once we are aware of what risks are likely to happen and what the impacts are likely to be, then we can put in place measures to really start to address them and really target some of those vulnerabilities we're seeing. So climate resilience is about building capacity at different levels to anticipate, to address, and also be aware that we will all experience climate related issues, so also to recover from climate impacts.
Thank you so much. This is really a brilliant idea that you are exploring. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabindra. And then we're going to be, when we're looking at climate resilience, it's bearing in mind, as we shared earlier, it's about the risks that are impacting both on their access to education, but also the quality of education and also their well-being within the school and learning and education system context. So if we go on to the next slide, so that's what climate resilience is. And we can see it's a process. We can all actively build climate resilience. But before we go into some of the ways that BSO have been trying to build climate resilience, I'd love to introduce Perna. And Perna, it'd be great if you can tell GF, what our starting point is, what kind of program activities BSO is supporting, and then we can talk a little bit more about how we're introducing climate within those program activities.
Yeah, thank you very much. Afresh, because I spent 4 days in the field. And for us, for VSO, any program that we are designing in education program in particular is looking at the vulnerability assessments, really helping and interacting with primary actors and really listening to them and what kind of shocks and stresses do they have to face, and what kind of adversities in terms of seasonal or then it was really humbling when I was working with 23 girls yesterday under our Engage project, and for example like these girls were walking for 1 hour on one way, and they were saying the dogs, it's nothing to do with the climate change. But again, then they were able to say because they have to spend more time, harvesting because the now unpredictability of the rain, or sometime the floods, and they have to cross the road, all the flooded as well. So to VSO, what we have been really trying to do is look at from the eyes perspective of the girls and the children with disabilities and others, and what kind of the socks and stitches they are, and also really engaging with them to find the solution. What kind of disaster risk reduction mechanism. I think Ravinder mentioned early on, and others like can they plant more trees, or can they have a wall, or and they are also demanding what if the schools are closed in terms of preparedness, so that they can continue asking for homework, what will happen. So that has been quite a fascinating experience for us. Now almost 3-4 years we have been using these tools of using the voluntary mapping or community mapping, transit walk, and this has all really helped us to think differently. And another big shift that has really helped or led us to do is not really looking through the education program as education, but more the holistic, and that means linking that to livelihood, and also linking to that with the health interventions as a result of the shocks and stresses that they face. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Perna. And yeah, so can really feel the energy coming from actually visiting and seeing the actual programs that Engage are supporting on the ground, and looking at those building blocks. So within our education work at VSO, Perna has been leading this really incredible approach in which VSO has different projects, and some of our projects are working with girls and with teachers, and supporting strengthened teaching methodologies, sometimes introducing safeguarding systems, within schools, and we're working within schools themselves to make them safer spaces. And when school access is disrupted due to disaster or COVID, we're also setting up education centres and learning centres or learning approaches within families or within displacement camps. And we're also working in some projects at system level, so looking at curricula design and development and policy strengthening. So our different projects in VSO sometimes are very community or school focused. Sometimes they're very much on the curricula, and sometimes they're engaging with the education stakeholders or policies. So as a result, within VSO, we're finding different ways, if we're working with children, how we approach climate resilience might look quite different compared to if we're working on an education curricula or we're working at policy level. So we're with VSO, we're trying to break down the different levels we work in and look at that level, what can we do? And as Perna says, sometimes we can build up multiple interventions as well. We'll share some examples. So what is our approach to climate pathways within education? If we just go on to the next slide. So we have, as Perna was sharing, been really committed the last 3 to 4 years of building climate resilience within all our programs, and ensuring that the education centres and schools that we're working in are safe spaces for children. And we've undertaken quite a conscious process to do that. Rabinder, maybe there'll be time later on, so I'll come to you after. Maybe we're going to look at the pathways, and I think you'll have lots to share on that. So I'll just continue for the moment. So in VSO, that means that we are actively, as we're working in our education design, trying to think through, if we're doing any education intervention, how can we have a climate message, or how can we build in a way to address climate change within that particular intervention. So we're really trying to use the building blocks of our education programme to increase access to information for all stakeholders on climate, or to embed ways to address climate change within those interventions. And we're looking at the children's level, the level of the teacher, the level of the school, and also the level of the education system, when we're thinking about what level we can build climate resilience at. And as Perna really importantly said, our starting point with VSO, and we'll share a little bit more about this, is we're doing a lot on understanding risks and vulnerabilities. So that's one of the key methodologies we're using, but we'll share that later. So those are, how we're starting to identify climate pathways within our work. And what do those pathways look like? So if we go to the next slide, we're going to share a little bit of, some of these pathways or these approaches we're discovering to build climate resilience into our work. And I'm going to just focus on these different levels, but many of you might be working at one level or another level, or some of you are working at multiple levels. But we're just going to go level by level, and I'm going to invite one of my colleagues, our partners, when we go into the examples to present or share one of their practical examples that they've used. So we're starting off with children and working with children and teachers. So if you have a program that's working directly with children or directly with teachers, one of the really key ways we can build climate resilience is really make sure that they have access to climate information and environmental awareness. And there are some incredible resources. So Per and I know introduced to our programs, Twinkle site, which has lovely child-centered climate resources, and we can share some of those afterwards, where you can introduce really simple participatory ways for children at different ages to understand what climate change is in a very visual way that doesn't actually put a lot of fear. You know, I think it's about really making sure that we're introducing climate without making it a huge, scary thing. We have to kind of share what's happening, but without creating harm by traumatizing children. So that's the second part, is the psychosocial, bearing in mind that we want to, introduce climate change in a positive way. And one of the ways we're doing that in VSO is making sure children can take action on climate change. So by doing things like planting trees, or by doing things like writing letters, and so that they don't feel powerless, they feel that they can do something about it. And that's part of our psychosocial well-being approach as well. So we at VSO have been doing quite a lot on psychosocial life skills for children, resilience life skills, and we're trying to introduce that alongside our climate work. We also, in some cases, such as Zimbabwe and Mozambique or Philippines, when we've had children impacted by climate cyclones and disasters, and we often introduce some psychosocial support for those children. So those are different ways, different pathways where we're starting to see, depending on the skills of your program and your team. And sometimes, for example, we can bring in a partner to support some of that work. And then finally, building the resilience skills of children to actually engage in climate planning and climate actions, as Perna was saying. That's a really critical part of the work that we empower children within that. Yeah. If we go into maybe the examples, so in Nigeria, for example, our teams there are introducing climate change to children by just using really simple approaches, like sharing an image of a tree, or asking the children to draw or create a tree, and ask the children, what are the benefits you get from trees, and what happens when those trees are cut down. So really getting children to connect and care for the environment, and also linking bringing them to spaces where they can actually interact with nature to strengthen their sense of well-being. We also have a really fantastic partner that VSO has been working with. CSDevNet and Pius and Lucky, I think, are both on this call. And we've been working with them to develop climate awareness information. So I'd love to share, ask Lucky or Pius to share what your approach is to strengthening access for children to climate information, and how you're approaching that in a child-friendly way.
Yeah.
Maybe go to the next slide. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Claude and team. I think it's amazing. All that the marvelous work engaging children, and at this point, it's what I will see, or what it's clear, is that we're thinking of the future and not just the Photoshop of saying we are including everybody or leaving no one behind and then not acting. So this actual work, it's the action that we really need. And thank you so much for VSO for all of the amazing work. So for us, one of our approach, which of course Claude has already mentioned, is trying to simplify action or climate action. And one key aspect is the use of acts, because we know that memory lasts, and also it's key because it captivates the children, also emotion, and also bring them to bear to those actions. So we use what we call parachutes for climate. And this is just a kind of awareness creation using decoration. The parachute actually is non-functional. Let me clarify that, so it won't be scary at this point, because of course we talk about emotion, like Claudia rightly said. So it's non-functional parachute, where we use cloth to decorate using art and also personal comments to talk about the health of the planet, as well as also leaving no one behind in this aspect of saying that we're pushing for prosperity, people and planet. And also the parachute is seen as a safety net. That's also having the children holding those parachutes together. It's a kind of demonstrating that we all need to get involved in action or calling for climate. And then the awareness creation. It's we designing those parachutes, or the youth actually designing it with different colors, showing where trees are being cut, and then the impact it will cause, because definitely there are some squirrels around and then they can't get to climb those trees, and meaning that this is affecting or having a huge impact on those wildlife that are available within those regions. So it's that, and aside that, also humans are suffering. We draw humans maybe by the side of those those trees that are cut down, and then it shows that the oxygen level is low and there's no shade any longer for the humans to have themselves maybe covered by the scorching sun that is rising, and then there'll be diagrams, of course, showing the sun reacting to the skin. And these are just simple approaches that we try to use in creating this awareness. I think the slide, Claudia, rightly, I think the next slide, I guess. So it just, that picture here, we're saying we should stop air pollution. And just a practical example as such. So we have them in several forms, bringing those youth peers together to champion this as a cause together. And the reason why Parachute, where everybody comes together, is because we just want to make sure that everybody is included, because it's an inclusive action and not just an individual action. So it's just one of those. And the others, of course, the Eco Peer Group, which also is a formation of what led to, of course, the Parachute for Climate push, where this eco group comes together, have debates, quiz, visit the local parliamentarians, show them pictures of where they are doing some courses like this, maybe visiting the gardens, and then having to know that, okay, it's very fascinating where the gardens are blossoming, or with all of the petals brightly colored. It shows that also the environment is in good shape and condition. And so the parliamentarians need to increase their effort, or need to make laws that will help support gardens within the city centers, so as to hold some of this biodiversity that also make the city beautiful. So these are just some few examples of the efforts within the country also that we're also partnering with VSO, among others. Of course, the awareness that Claudia already mentioned, where we are championing youth, or bringing youth together on climate awareness, and also push for climate justice, training them, a kind of experiential learning processes and mentorship, bringing those youth together. And this has also translated into having these youths going back to the communities and going back to the schools to lead campaigns on tree planting. And it's amazing when you see this happen as a ripple effect of some of the little efforts that we're putting together in conjunction with VSO. Thank you so much for the opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pius. And yeah, so really what strikes me about your approach is the experiential learning, how you really actively try to get children involved in activities to engage with climate issues, and also how you're using not only kind of direct support with children, but also you've been involved in training youth champions. And we'll hear a little bit more about how we can train volunteers and peers from the Engage project, because they've been doing some great work with volunteers sharing climate information in schools. Thank you, Pius. We'll go on to our next pathway now, the next group of pathways, when we're looking at the level of schools and school centres or learning centres. There's a huge amount we can do And this is very much where learning takes place, but where a lot of the risks of climate change are experienced. And as Perna was sharing, one of our key approaches here that we've been introducing to most of our education programs is supporting either teachers or volunteers or school stakeholders to do a climate risk assessment in their school so that they can understand. And this is really, it doesn't have to be scientific, it's really understanding what are the risks that have already been happening and what patterns are they seeing in the school and which areas in the school might be safe spaces or maybe more risky spaces. And we also have developed quite a few really interactive tools and which are child friendly that support this process. And we're going to hear from one of our amazing volunteers who's going to share how they've been doing this work in Rwanda. So doing risk assessments in schools can then lead to really tangible actions and new pathways. So for example, after risk assessments and action plans in schools, we might identify that food security is the biggest impact of climate change and for those children. So we might introduce food programs or nutrition programs within the school or within communities. And we might also identify access to water or sanitation issues is becoming a huge problem because of drought. And we might either ourselves introduce alternative sources of water, or maybe start working with local government or district authorities to try and access better, more sustainable water supplies for the children. We might also see that there's a gap of information, so awareness raising, school notice boards are all different actions that we've taken after our risk assessments and action plans in schools. And the action plans we develop in schools, sometimes our teams call them a climate or DRR action plan for the school, and sometimes they will use the actions that they identify in the process to embed that in a school improvement plan or a preparedness plan. So whatever the plan is that the school uses, we can do the risk assessment and use that risk assessment to ensure actions are built in to that plan to build resilience to climate change. And one of the other types of plans we've been supporting for schools is preparedness. So not only look at the risks we're looking at now, but we can work with schools to think about what risks are you likely to experience and what do we need to do as a school to be better prepared and do things like evacuation drills. For example, if the school is very prone to floods or to cyclones and things like that. So the in-school process, the most important thing is to engage children, because it's children who really know what the risks they experience are, and they're the ones who often come out with the most creative solutions. So I'd love to introduce Jessica to everyone. And Jessica is an education specialist. She was one of our international volunteers who did a huge amount of risk assessments in Rwanda. And Jessica, we'd love to hear about what you did and what you achieved through that process.
Thank you very much, Clodagh. Yes, I was in Rwanda and I worked with two volunteers, national volunteers, Leome and Enias. We worked to support 31 schools in the district of Nyamasheke in Western Uganda. It is one of the poorest districts in the country, but also one that is one of the most affected by climate change related issues. For example, some of the shocks and stresses, one of the key risks and stresses they face is from flooding and landslides due to the prolonged rainy season in the country. So we worked with children, or we worked with the schools, bringing together key stakeholders, teachers, parents, and the school community leaders, local leaders in the school settings. And we engage with them to identify the key risks and stresses they face, not only climate change related, but other stresses. One of the key ones was poverty, as identified, which also brings about other related stresses. So we adopted an approach to involve children more in the process of identifying the risks and stresses they felt. And what we did, this enabled the children to engage with the teachers and the elders in the communities, that is the head teachers, the parents, to share their experience of the risks and the stresses that affect them the most, why, and is particularly which group is most affected. So, and out of these, children played a key role in not only identifying the risks and stresses they face the most, but also engaging and seeing through the process of ensuring that their ideas are incorporated in the school strategic plans, because ultimately at school level, after the risk identification process and the resilience planning, we ensured that all that has been identified, the actions that had been identified, would be included to strengthen the school strategic plans in place. And we also tried to ensure that, or we actually ensured that when engagement with the district leadership happened in all the engagements and the meetings and workshops that we had, children were represented. So we find that these children, having been empowered from the at school level during the risk assessment and planning level, were now better able to advocate and really give their voice to emphasize some of the risks that they face the most, and to impress upon the policymakers to really give attention to these. And ultimately, the district leadership was able to incorporate these risks, the key risks identified and expressed by the children, into their district plans. And also the leaders came away with the key learning that it's important not only to identify when they are trying to find solutions to problems at district level, not only to look at the problems or the risks and their effects, but mostly the vulnerabilities underlying these, and what vulnerabilities affect the children the most. And also they understood the power of the voice of the children in expressing and being advocates for others. And so really, ultimately, we can say that the major key takeaway from the process was empowering children to advocate for themselves and others in addressing and finding solutions to the risks and the problems and the challenges that affect them the most. Thank you very much, Claudine.
Claudia, are you there? I'm not sure
if you're frozen. Jessica. I'm just checking if everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can now. Thank you. Claudia, could you hear us? Hi everyone, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Just give us a second while we see where we can get Claudia back.
You are loud and clear. You're loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Perna, while we try to get Claudia back, are you able to go on to the next pathway?
Yes, so but I don't have a presentation. Is there a pathway?
There we are. Yes.
Okay. So sorry. So can you hear me?
We can. Also, I know Claudia wanted to go back to have a look at the dashboard slide as well. So
okay. So if you just bring back to dashboard slide, then I just talk through.
Great. Thank you.
So what you can see here is the dashboard, and we have collected this information from various sources. So as the volunteer complete the vulnerability assessment and the risk, the assessment, I'm sorry, it's a holy, and then I can just see the cheerful children outside. And in this dashboard, we just collect, and in this example, you can see from Pakistan, and as we collect the risk, and this has been a way for us to monitor and look at the trend as well, and as the volunteer complete, they complete this on our online form, and the visualizations is done. And what has been really useful, this one, is to look at whether the similarities and the trend, for example, very similar Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, we work in, and we see the same, because what happened in Nepal, for example, will have impact in Bangladesh when it's a floods, or India as well. So this has also helped us internally to learn each other, and especially whenever we are designing education program, now thinking about what kind of disaster risk reduction or emergency fund. And that is another big shift as well. Now in the past we'd only think about the delivery of the education program. Now we know, so we need to develop. So for example, really making sure that we have allocated the resources and we bring in the preparedness aspect on that as well. So this is just what I would say. And then the data is you can see at the bottom, at the community level, some are done at the community level, but also at the school level. And then really talking about what kind of response we have done, what kind of social impact that has and also the impact on children as well.
Thank you, Perna, and thank you so much for jumping to the rescue and with my connectivity. And maybe just a few words on that dashboard that you saw. So it looks slightly complex, but actually this is something that is really based on some really simple tools that we share, that we were very happy to share with you. So in schools, we're doing very simple approaches, as we shared, to identify risks, things like timelines, using simple action plans, seasonal calendars, and really simple ways that children can participate. We have our own tool called Batteries, which helps children share what level of vulnerability or capacity they feel for climate. And based on those tools, we identify climate risks, climate vulnerabilities, but also actions that children feel are needed. And we use a very simple app called Kobo to collect that data. So we often train volunteers to collect that data and to input that data into this dashboard. And that way we can see across the locations we work in how many schools are experiencing flood or drought. And that can be really effective at sharing the information with higher levels of government. But we can also monitor whether actions are delivered or new risks happen. So that's our dashboard. And we've been working with organizations to help them do similar pieces of work. So far, we've done about 140 school-based risk assessments and action plans throughout all our programs, and a lot of those are in Nepal. So we'll hear from the Nepal team in a minute as part of the next pathway that we're just going to introduce. Okay. So community-based approaches, supporting peer-to-peer or community-based approaches. So as we shared, a lot of the climate change issues that children are experiencing are in schools, but often they're also in communities as well, within their families, livelihoods being damaged, gender-based violence issues. So we find that actually sometimes not only doing risk assessments in schools, but also risk assessments and action plans in communities or with families can help us address some of those climate risks we're seeing within the home and community context. So we apply a similar approach to communities, and we can develop action plans within communities. But something really powerful that we're starting to see as really effective is supporting other stakeholders within the communities to support the school. And one of the wonderful initiatives that the Nepal team are doing, and also Sidse Devnet Pius mentioned is happening also in Nigeria, is we're training volunteers who can then do these risk assessments in schools and can share information on climate change with children and school stakeholders. And I'd love just to ask maybe one of the engaged team just to share a snapshot, so maybe 2 minutes of the work that you're doing, training sisters or peer volunteers to support children on climate change. I think it might be Shyam that you'll be sharing, or Feroz who'll be sharing it with us.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Claudia. As Purna said, in Nepal, today is holidays for celebrating this holy and joyful, colorful festivals. And we have just returned back from field yesterday with Purna and VSO Global team. So we have 3 tiers of girls and inclusive education network. So, one at community and school level, and another is at local government level, municipality level, and third one is at the provincial level. So these all 3 types of girls and inclusive education networks are advocating, implementing, and educating these climate change and girls empowerment issues, particularly on climate change. So we have a huge number of community volunteers, national volunteers, and community mobilizers who advocate, educate, do the capacity building of Girls and Inclusive Education Network member, our prime director, and even the government officials to address the girls and climate change issues at their policy level, at their planning level, and also educate and empower girls and networks member for the implementation of the action plan, and monitor the planned activities, implemented activities, provide the feedback, and support, peer support because the community volunteers are based at community level, and they have frequently discussion with the primary actors, their parents, on the education issues, on the livelihood issues, on the GBV issues, their complaints. So they every day, and though they are based at their local level, they have opportunity to discuss with the primary actors and monitor and make the follow-up the activities and the contemporary issues, and discuss with the girls and give the way forward, and empower and educate them. So these are our community volunteers and peer support to our primary actors, as well as with the parents. And we also provide some livelihood support to the children with disability and their parents, so that they can cope with the impact of climate change issues and climate change, and increase their capacity to cope with the adverse condition made by the climate change effect. So these are our systems, and we also lobby with the local government to make the policy in favor of address the climate change issues, girls issues, and sustain the girls and inclusive education network, so that beyond the projects, local government can continue the education, awareness, preparedness, and mitigation measures in after the beyond the project, and they can sustain for the girls and inclusive education networks their works and alliances as well. And a few of the local government has already endorsed the policy in favor of policy and procedures for the girls and inclusive education networks, those who are mainly focused on climate change issues and social harmful practices that is affecting girls' education, their livelihoods, and these things. So they have also allocated some budgets for girls and inclusive education networks regarding the climate change and gender-based violence issues for the girls and inclusive education networks. So these are the system in place in Nepal, and we from the Engage project, we are implementing the approaches to the primary actors. Thank you.
May I say something, Claudia? So in addition
Yes,
to,
please.
Shyam sir, almost he has completed all the, things. But I would like to share one thing, that we have also developed climate change and women empowerment training for 3 days that we are, implementing, and we are just giving training to the Girls and Inclusive Education Network, where, mayor, deputy mayor, ward chairpersons, gender focal teachers, students, all are there. So that, we have completed one event in every district. So more than almost 300 GIN member were trained on climate change and women empowerment training. And, I think this is very right forum to say, I would like to say, say thanks to Ian and Atik. They have, contributed a lot to develop 3 days climate change and women empowerment training. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Feroz. So even though, as you see, we started with the peer-to-peer volunteers and training them to support schools, you can see from the Engage example, actually they've been using different pathways together to building climate awareness with for children through volunteers, strengthening volunteers, the ability to do risk assessments with school stakeholders, and then engaging with education authorities and leaders to create actions at all these different levels. So thank you for sharing those really great pathways, an example of how these pathways are all can be complementary. Some of you might just want to look at one way to include climate resilience in your work, and some of you might find these different pathways that might really support each other. Thank you for that. We're going to go into breakout groups. So just maybe we can just look at the final pathway. We've already heard about it, so I'd love just to share it. So we've been hearing about the policy and system level influence. We heard from Jessica in Rwanda how they used those 30 schools and shared the results with district authorities, and district authorities actually started supporting some of the actions that children asked for. And we've heard in Nepal how they're consciously bringing some of the risks that children are experiencing to education authorities and local government. And we've also been engaging CS DevNet, our partner in Nigeria. We've been partnering to engage on climate forums and COP26 to share the messages of children and youth in those forums. And we can also, I think we had a great suggestion in the chat panel. We've seen also curriculum. We can actually influence at this level through influencing the education curricula. If we can include climate or strengthen climate within that, then that will help strengthen the whole system. So we've also policy level and system level change is possible through this work. I'm going to hand over, maybe we're going to go into breakout groups now. You can choose the breakout group that actually is most relevant to your work. So we'd like you to join a breakout group. I think Sharina is clicking, putting the link on for us on the chat. You might want to look at children's awareness on climate change. You might want to look at psychosocial well-being and making sure we're protecting children from climate anxiety or supporting them with the traumas they face. You might choose the school-based risk assessments and action plans and learn more or share your work in supporting those. Or you can also choose a peer-to-peer support, how we can strengthen, capacitate peer support and community level actions for climate resilience. So choose a group that best suits you. You might already be doing something, so we'd love to hear, what are you doing in this pathway? Are you already doing an intervention that's supporting at this level on climate resilience? Or secondly, if you're not doing something already, you might have a suggestion for something that you could do within your program. And maybe Sharina, I think we've got now about 20 minutes for those breakout groups. So we'll be in those breakout groups for 20 minutes. Please, feel free to join. And if you have any questions or difficulties, do stay and let us know, or send messages on chat. Sharina, can I just check, once the teams join the breakout groups, will they automatically come back? Oh, so you'll need to rejoin. So once you come out of the breakout group, we'll notify you when the time's up. You'll need to rejoin this link. So please click back on this link because we want to hear feedback from your groups. So rejoin this link at 11:20, please, and have a great discussion in your breakout groups, everyone.